Picture this. It is 6 a.m. in Moscow, August 19th, 1991. You turn on the radio, and instead of the morning news, you hear classical music. Tchaikovsky, Swan. In the Soviet Union, people knew exactly what that meant. They had heard that same music play when Stalin died, when Brezhnev died, when Andropov died, when Chernenko died. Classical music on state radio meant one thing. Something had gone terribly wrong at the top. But this time, it was not a death. It was something far more dangerous. It was a coup. And what happened over the next 24 hours would not just determine the fate of one country. It would reshape the entire planet. To understand why those 24 hours mattered so much, you need to understand what the Soviet Union looked like in August 1991. By this point, the USSR was already crumbling. Not from outside attack, from within. Its leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, had spent the previous 6 years trying to save the Soviet Union through radical reforms. He gave people freedom of speech, freedom of the press. He opened the borders. He allowed contested elections, and it worked too well. Because once people were allowed to speak freely, most of them said the exact same thing. We want out. By 1991, Poland, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and Romania had all peacefully broken free from Soviet influence. Lithuania had declared independence. So had Georgia. Ukraine was on the edge. Gorbachev's response. Rather than send tanks like his predecessors always had, he was days away from signing a new Union Treaty, a document that would transform the USSR from a centralized empire into a loose federation of sovereign states, where each republic governed itself. It was scheduled to be signed on August 20th, 1991. For the hardliners inside the Soviet government, the generals, the KGB chiefs, the party veterans, this treaty was a death sentence for everything they had built their lives around. They had one day to stop it. The men behind the coup called themselves the State Committee on the State of Emergency, GKCHP in Russian. There were 8 of them: the vice president, the prime minister, the defense minister, the KGB chief, the interior minister. Together, they controlled the army, the secret police, and the state media. On paper, they were the most powerful men in the country. On August 18th, they sent a delegation to Gorbachev's vacation dacha on the Crimean coast. They gave him an ultimatum: either sign a declaration handing over power to them, or they would announce he was ill and take over themselves. Gorbachev refused, so they cut the phone lines, surrounded the dacha with troops and naval vessels, and left him there, isolated, powerless, under house arrest. Then, they moved on Moscow. 6 a.m. The announcement. Swan Lake fades. An announcer reads a statement in a flat, bureaucratic monotone. Comrade Gorbachev is unable to perform his duties for health reasons. Vice President Gennady Yanayev was now in charge. A state of emergency had been declared. Tanks were already moving through the streets of Moscow. Most people assumed this was it. The reformers had lost. The old guard was back. 9 a.m. A man climbs into a car. Boris Yeltsin was asleep when his aides woke him with the news. Yeltsin was the elected president of Russia, not the Soviet Union, but the Russian Republic within it. He was Gorbachev's political rival, had clashed with him for years, and had been considered a troublemaker and a drunk by the Soviet establishment. They told him the coup leaders had already issued orders for his arrest. He could have fled. He could have gone quiet and waited. Instead, he got in his car and drove straight to the Russian Parliament building, a large white building on the Moscow River that everyone called the White House, and set up his command there. The tanks had arrived in Moscow by now. Hundreds of them, rumbling through the streets. Citizens stood on the sidewalks, watching. Some threw eggs. Some just stared. 12 p.m. The tank speech. By noon, A crowd had gathered outside the Russian parliament. People came not because anyone organized them to, but because they felt, somehow, that this was the place to be, that history was happening here and they needed to witness it. And then, Boris Yeltsin walked out of the building, climbed on top of a tank number 110 of the Tchaikovsky division, to be exact, and held up a piece of paper. He read a declaration calling the coup an unconstitutional seizure of power. He called on Russian citizens to resist. He called on soldiers to disobey unlawful orders. The crowd erupted. This was the moment, not the signing of a treaty, not a speech in parliament. A large, half-drunk man standing on a tank in the rain, refusing to back down. And the soldiers, the very soldiers whose tank he was standing on, they did not arrest him. They listened. 5 p.m. The press conference that doomed the coup. The coup leaders held a press conference that afternoon. This was their moment to project strength, to show the Soviet people and the world that they were in control. It did not go well. Yanayev, the man who had just declared himself acting president of a nuclear superpower, sat at the table with visibly trembling hands. Later accounts would note he had been drinking heavily. His voice wavered. His eyes darted. When asked where Gorbachev was, he stumbled through a non-answer. A journalist asked directly, "Do you understand that you have carried out a coup d'etat?" Yanayev blinked. The world watched a man who was supposed to be terrifying look terrified. Midnight. The barricades. As the night fell on August 19th, something extraordinary happened. Ordinary Muscovites, office workers, students, grandmothers, engineers began building barricades around the Russian parliament by hand. They dragged metal fences, trolleybuses, concrete blocks. They stood in the rain for hours, not knowing if the tanks would come through them or stop. Some brought their children. Some brought thermoses of tea. 3 of them would not go home. Dmitry Koma, Vladimir Yusov, and Ilya Tchaikovsky were killed when an armored column tried to force its way through a tunnel near the parliament on the night of August 20th. They are the only 3 people who died in the coup, and they died stopping a tank with their bodies. By August 21st, barely 48 hours after Swan Lake played, it was over. Military units had begun switching sides. Pilots refused to fly sorties over the city. The KGB's elite Alpha Group, ordered to storm the parliament, refused the command. The coup leaders, realizing they had no army willing to follow them, began to scatter. Some tried to fly to Gorbachev in Crimea to negotiate. He refused to see them. They were arrested. Gorbachev flew back to Moscow, but returned to a city that had fundamentally changed. Here's the cruel irony. The coup failed completely, but in failing, it destroyed what it was trying to save. Before the coup, Gorbachev's new Union Treaty still had a chance. Before the coup, most Soviet republics were still willing to negotiate staying together in some form. After the coup, that path vanished. Estonia declared independence on day 1 of the coup, August 20th. Latvia declared independence on August 21st. Ukraine declared on August 24th. Belarus on August 25th. Then Moldova. Then Kyrgyzstan. Then Uzbekistan. One after another, like dominoes. The coup did not restore the USSR. It proved to every republic that Moscow could not be trusted.